Thank you very much. So it is a real honor for me to be here with you today. It's a real honor. However, whenever I speak during this period, there's always a question in the air. Sometimes people ask it, sometimes people are a little bit shy about asking it. And that question is, what is the relevance of the science of happiness to what we're doing now, what we're going through now? So if you ask me during regular times, 6 months ago, a year ago, I would have said it's very relevant for your work. It's very relevant for your life. You'll become more creative if you increase levels of happiness. You become more productive if you increase levels of happiness. Revenues in your organizations will actually go up if you and your employees increase levels of well-being. But today, when there are so many difficulties and hardships and challenges in our world, what is the relevance of happiness? You know, one of my friends recently said to me, Tal, shouldn't we quarantine happiness for now? And my answer to that is, no, we shouldn't. Happiness is as important today as ever. And let me explain why. So during regular days, let's say we are at a 3 in terms of our happiness levels, and we want to increase it to 5. But when our happiness level is in the negative, when we're anxious and frustrated, when we're concerned about the future of our country, the future of our business, our personal well-being, and our families, happiness can also help. Why? Because it helps us become more resilient. But even more than more resilient, it helps us become anti-fragile. Let me explain. Anti-fragility is a term that was introduced by Nassim Taleb, who's a professor at the University in New York. And his theory is as follows. You see, when it comes to resilience, it's the ability of something, whether it's material or whether it's a person, to return to its original form after pressure and stress is being put on it. That is resilience. You think about a ball, you drop it, it bounces right back up. That's resilience. Anti-fragility, the opposite of fragility, is taking resilience to the next level. In other words, what it does is if the ball bounces, it bounces back higher than it was before. If you put pressure on a system, whether it's your organization, whether it's the economy, whether it's your family or you as an individual, you don't just recover from the hardship and difficulty, you become even stronger as a result of it. This is the purpose of the science of happiness, to help you deal with difficulties, with hardships, and to help you, to help your family, to help your organization bounce back higher, bounce back better, stronger than you were before this crisis. And the question that the science of happiness asks is, how is it possible? Well, in nature, we see it. We'll talk about later how when you go to the gym and you're lifting weights, you're putting pressure on your system. Now, as a result of that pressure, it's not just that you recover after the gym, you actually get stronger. Your muscles become stronger, healthier, happier as a result of the workout, as a result of the pressure. And the question is, how can we apply this natural process to our lives as leaders in our organizations, as leaders in our community, in our country, and of course, in our families? So I want to talk about some strategies for you as leaders to implement so that you can create an anti-fragile organization, so that you can create an anti-fragile family and in person, so that you can grow stronger as a result of this very difficult time that we're all going through. The first topic that I'd like to talk about is what I've come to call the permission to be human. The permission to be human is a topic that I first thought about when I taught my first class at Harvard in positive psychology, in the science of happiness. So I was having lunch one day, and one of the students who wasn't in my class came in and said to me, Tal, may I join you for lunch? And I said, yes, of course. So he sits down next to me, and then he says, Tal, I hear you're teaching a class on happiness. And I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, my roommates are in your class. I said, that's wonderful. And then he said, but Tal, you've got to be careful now. And I said, what? And he said, Tal, you've got to watch out. And I said, why? And he said, because if I see you unhappy, I'll tell my roommates. And I actually used that in class the following day when I addressed my class. And I told my students, the last thing in the world that I want you to think is that I'm always happy. Or that by the end of the year, when the class is over, you will experience a constant high. There are only two kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions like sadness or anger or frustration or disappointment or envy. Two kinds of people. The first kind of people who do not experience painful emotions are the psychopaths. The second kind of people who don't experience painful emotions are dead. So if you experience painful emotions, it's actually a good sign. It means you're not a psychopath and you're alive. Good place to start. We can build on that. The problem in today's world, though, is that we do not give ourselves the permission to be human. We do not give ourselves the permission to experience the full range of human emotions. Why? Because we think there is something wrong with us if we're sad or anxious or angry, when in fact there is something wrong with us if we do not experience these emotions. You know, the best advice that I got after David, who is our eldest son, was born, that was more than 16 years ago, was from our doctor, from our pediatrician. So David was born in Boston. It was 1 a.m. And at around 7 a.m., the doctor comes in, he checks up on Tommy, my wife, checks up on David. For some reason, he doesn't check up on me. They were doing great. And then he leaves. But just before he closes the door, he says, oh, and one more thing. He says, over the next few months, you're going to experience every single kind of emotion to the extreme. You're going to experience extreme joy and extreme frustration. You're going to experience extreme love and extreme anxiety. Every emotion to the extreme. And he said, it's fine, it's natural, we all go through it. And he left. That's the advice that I got after David was born. Let me tell you why. Because after about a month, I started to feel some envy towards David. Why? Because this was the first time since my wife and I had been together, and we have been together since the age of 14. She was my high school sweetheart. It's the first time since we'd been together that someone else was getting more attention than I was, and I felt envy. Now, normally I would say to myself, Tal, what a terrible father you are. Envious of your own son? That's horrible. But because I had the doctor's voice in my head saying, every emotion to the extreme, it's fine, it's natural, giving me the permission to be human, I allowed that emotion to flow through me. And then 5 minutes later, experienced the love that I felt and feel towards my son. Why is it so important to give ourselves the permission to be human? Why? Because there is a paradox at play. And the paradox is that when I reject painful emotions, these emotions only intensify. They grow stronger. It is when I allow these emotions to flow through me, that's when they leave. That's when they don't overstay their welcome. Whether it's envy, whether it's anxiety, whether it's fear. If I accept the fear, that fear will go away. If I reject the fear, that fear is more likely to stay. Same with anger. Same with sadness. And this is the paradox. The paradox has another side to it. Because if I reject painful emotions like sadness, like envy, like anger, what I'm also doing is rejecting pleasurable emotions. Why? Because all emotions flow through one pipeline, not two pipelines, one pipeline. And if I reject one set of emotions, the pleasurable ones, I'm also inadvertently rejecting the pleasurable emotions. In the words of Golda Meir, who was Israeli prime minister back in the 1970s, those who don't know how to weep with their whole heart don't know how to laugh either. They're two sides of the same coin. Sadness and joy, anger and anxiety, fear and courage. Now, when I talk about accepting these emotions, I'm not saying that we should simply resign and say, okay, so I'm sad or I'm anxious, so I'm just going to do nothing for 3 weeks. Not at all. What I'm talking about is active acceptance. This is about accepting the emotion and then going ahead and acting in a way that I think is most appropriate. For example, I can experience envy towards my son or towards my best friend, which I had in the past. But I can still choose to act generously, with care, towards my son and my best friend. In other words, the emotion doesn't need to control me. On the contrary, if I accept and embrace the emotion and say to myself, oh, it's natural, I'm human, I'm not a psychopath. If I accept the emotion, then I'm more likely to be able to act appropriately, to choose how I want to act. And there is research in organizations, in businesses on this very topic. For example, this mostly applies to women more than men, even though there are many men who struggle with it and there are women who don't struggle with it. Generally, this applies more to women. The emotion of anger. Women very often say to themselves, I shouldn't be angry. It's not feminine. And what happens? A few things happen. The first thing that happens is that this anger stays inside and very often strengthens and strengthens and grows. As a result of it, physical illnesses will be more common because somehow it has to come out, and it will come out eventually through a physical illness. And finally, ultimately, you're likely to blow up anyway and get even angrier. Whereas if you accept the anger, you don't need to act on it, but just acknowledge it. Talk about it. Write about it. Then it's more likely to go away and you're more likely to be able to choose your action. So this is mostly, not only, but mostly women. Men. Men also have a favorite emotion which they reject. Anxiety or fear. What, I'm afraid? Me, a manager, a leader? Of course not, I'm stronger than that. And then what happens? The fear grows inside. Ultimately, it comes out. How does it come out? As an illness. Or it controls one's behavior. You see, courage is not about not having fear. Courage is about having fear and going ahead anyway. As a manager, as a leader, certainly in difficult times, there are certainly situations that bring up fear and anxiety. It's natural. It's okay to feel it. And it's important to express it. How do you express it? How do you express emotion? Whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's sadness, whether it's envy, whether it's frustration. Well, there are three main ways to express emotions. One, simply shed a tear, cry. Two, talk to someone about it, whether you're a partner, whether at home, whether you're a partner or colleague at work, whether a psychologist. It doesn't matter. Your best friend, someone you trust. Talk about the emotion. Express it rather than suppress it. And another way, a very effective way of expressing emotion, of giving ourselves the permission to be human, is by writing about it. Keeping a journal. You know, when I started off after graduating from business school, I asked my Professor Richard Hackman, who he passed away recently, was a very famous researcher in the world of business, organizational behavior. I asked him for his advice because I went on and became a consultant. He said, my number one advice for you, keep a journal. And he said, in the journal, write about ideas that you have, of course, and also write about your emotions, your feelings. Permission to be human. This is especially important these days because emotions are so high. A friend of mine just yesterday came out with a new study, which wasn't surprising. Worldwide, anxiety levels are higher than they'd ever been. It's understandable. We're going through a pandemic. There is an economic crisis. Of course, there'll be anxiety. The key is to accept it. And here is the main idea. In order to fulfill your potential for happiness, you must first allow in unhappiness. Giving ourselves the permission to be human is the foundation of a full and fulfilling life and the foundation of fulfilling our potential for well-being as well as for success as leaders. I want to move on now to a second topic that is important in order to create anti-fragility. In other words, to help you grow stronger as a result of this crisis, to help your organizations, to help your families, as well as your communities. And the idea is about stress. So as I mentioned earlier, stress is at an all-time high. Now, it's not like before the pandemic, stress wasn't an issue. It was a big issue then as well. Look at the headlines for the newspaper. The alarming long-term consequences of workplace stress. Again, this is before the pandemic. Talking about stress as the silent killer, as being dangerous for your physical health, being dangerous for your organization. Burnout, so common. What do we do about the stress level? Well, my colleagues and I have been researching stress. And what we found over the past 20 years or so is that actually, all along, by attacking stress, we have been attacking the wrong thing. We have been focusing on the wrong culprit, on the wrong problem, because actually, stress is not the problem. And I want to share with you how, but before that, I just want to, because stress is such a big problem, I know today, and in the organization, I want to give us an objective, a goal. And here is my goal. I hope that by the end of this session, you will all feel a lot calmer. You will all look something like this. So I hope the beers and the TV is ready. So how do we get there? Well, here is the thing. We don't. Why? Because actually, stress is not the problem. In fact, stress potentially is good for us. That is what we found in our research. Now, how is that? Everyone talks about it as the silent killer, as the problem. How is stress helpful? How is it good for us? Well, let me go back to the analogy that I used at the beginning. You go to the gym and you lift weights. 2 days later, you go back to the gym and you lift weights again. 2 days after that, you go back and you lift weights again. After about a month, you're stronger, more muscles. You're healthier. After 6 months, even more. After a year, stronger than you'd ever been before. Stress is not the problem. When do the problems begin? The problems begin when you go to the gym and you lift weights, and 1 minute after, you lift more weights, and 2 minutes after that, you lift even more weights, and the following day, you increase weight and more and more and more. That's when the problems begin. That's when you get injured. That's when you get weaker rather than stronger. In other words, the problem is not the stress. The problem rather is the lack of recovery. Whether it's in the gym physiologically or in life psychologically. You see, the problem in today's world is not, it has never been stress. The problem in today's world is the lack of recovery. We know how to deal with stress. We're very good at it. In the past, there was stress of a lion chasing us. Today, there is a stress of having to hand in a report or COVID-19. That's stress. We can deal with it. We're good at dealing with stress. The difference between today and the past is that in the past, there was more time for recovery, whereas today, there isn't, because we're on all the time, around the clock, and we don't give ourselves time for recovery, and we pay a very high price. In order to become anti-fragile, in order to become resilient and grow from the stress, from the hardship, we must have recovery. And this is the thing that is most missing from your lives in all likelihood. You being leaders, being managers. And you know what? The fact that you don't have enough recovery in your life probably affects those people around you, because they watch you, they learn from you. And you need to lead by example here. You see what healthy, happy, and successful people do. This is not about compromising on your success. What healthy, happy, and successful people do is that they energize their lives with multi-levels of recovery. Let me give you a few examples. So the first level of recovery is the micro level, the short periods of recovery. For example, every 1 hour or 2 hours, take a 15-minute break. You know, you may be on Zoom for an hour or 2 hours, take a 10-minute break. Just walk around, have a cup of coffee, meditate if that's your thing, break for lunch. However, lunch, not while you're on the phone and doing work at the same time, that's not recovery, that's simply more stress. Or go to the gym. You know that regular physical exercise has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication. Exercise, even if you can't leave your home, walk on the spot, it doesn't matter, move. At least 30 minutes 3 times a week. And then every hour or two, just walk around a little bit, move your limbs, get your blood flowing. This is micro-level recovery that is so important. You know, recently, a friend of mine, this was before the pandemic, a friend of mine was invited to speak at a trading firm in New York. Now, a trading firm, they buy and sell stocks. So all day, the employees there are on the screen, buy, sell, buy, sell. And the reason why they invited my friend was because he is probably the world's leading authority on stress. And they were experiencing real difficulties in their organization. There was a lot of burnout. People were leaving. Those who weren't leaving, many were getting sick, all symptoms of stress. So they bring him in. He gives a lecture very similar to what I just told you now. Stress is not the problem is lack of recovery, and on and on. And at the end of the lecture, they say to him, "Doctor, we love what you had to say. Tell us what to do." And he said, "Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. What I'd like you to do is every 2 hours, take a 15-minute break. During those 15 minutes, I want you to either meditate or have a cup of coffee or go downstairs and walk around the block." This was in New York City. Whatever it is, 15-minute break every 2 hours. They said to him, "You're joking, right?" He said, "No, I'm not. Why?" He said, "We don't have 15 minutes. You know how much can happen on the world markets in 15 minutes? We're on that screen all the time." He said, "Oh, how about 10 minutes? They said, "No." 5? No. He said, "How about 30 seconds? They think for a little bit and they say, "Okay, 30 seconds we'll give you. What have you got? Quickly." He said, "Okay, here is what I'd like you to do. What I'd like you to do is that every 2 hours, I want you to take 30 seconds. And during those 30 seconds, Ideally, close your eyes, but you don't have to. Ideally, close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. 5 to 6 seconds in, 5 to 6 seconds out. 5 to 6 seconds in and out, in and out. He said 3 deep breaths. If you really want to go wild, take 4 deep breaths. He said, however, I want you to promise me that this is what you will do. Not just today and tomorrow, from now on. Every 2 hours, set an alarm on your smartphone, whatever. But do it every 2 hours, stop for 30 to 40 seconds, 3 to 4 deep breaths. They said, you've got a deal. And they did it. Within 2 weeks, that organization looked and felt very different from what it did before. People were significantly happier as a result of this simple intervention. Now, why? 2 reasons. First reason, because the problem is not the stress, the problem is lack of recovery. And what happens during those 30 seconds is you shift from the stress response to what Herbert Benson from Harvard Medical School calls the relaxation response. From the stress response to the relaxation response. And those 30 seconds then affect the next 30 seconds and maybe the next hour. And if you do it consistently, just like in the gym, your body and your mind have time for recovery. The key, though, is to do it regularly, not to do it today because you remember. Day in and day out. What a difference that can make. Then there is also mid-level recovery. That's about getting a good night's sleep. There is so much research coming out of Stanford, coming out of UC Berkeley, coming out of UC San Diego. For some reason, all the research on sleep comes out of California. I don't know why, but it's good research. And what the research shows is just how important sleep is. Now, if you go to bed and you don't fall asleep, don't worry about it. Just lie down. Just relax, just read a book. Don't open your smartphone because that will take away sleep. But rest. Or taking a day off. You know, even God needed a day off. I think there is an important message here for us, mere mortals. And finally, this is about macro level recovery, taking a week off or 2 weeks off once in a while. That's so important. Now, I'm talking about this, and I know that it's difficult for many of you to hear it. Why? Because you're successful, because you're hard workers, because most of you, like me, are type A's. You know, go, 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 and then go some more. But think of yourself as a racing car. You know, a racing car that goes around the track over and over again. And this racing car, or the driver, after, let's say, 30 laps, says, I don't want to take a pit stop. I'm not going to take a break. Because if I take a break, other cars are going to continue driving. So I'm not going to take a pit stop. What happens? Well, one of 2 things happen. Either the tires blow up, or the car runs out of fuel. This is exactly what happens to millions, if not billions, of people around the world today. We're running out of fuel. And what we need to do is stop for recovery, for refueling. The pit stop is essential because if you do that, have that pit stop, that recovery, you're able to perform better. You're able to recover from stress. You become anti-fragile. You become happier as well as more successful. So taking time for recovery, whether it's the 30 seconds breath, whether it's the regular physical exercise, whether it's a good night's sleep, whether it's the vacation once in a while, whatever it takes. It's important that you do. It's important that the people working for you do it. It's important, of course, that your family members do it. You know, it was last week. I had a really, really tough day. I was stressed. I was doing a lot of work. My parents are in high risk. Of course, with the pandemics, I was, with them. We were worried. There were symptoms, a lot of issues, a lot of things on my mind. 7 p.m. came that night, and I said to my kids and to my wife, I said to them, look, we were supposed to watch a movie together, but I told them, look, I need some recovery. And I went to my room, 7 o'clock, and I shut the door, shed a few tears, wrote in my journal, gave myself the permission to be human, read a little bit, and then fell asleep earlier than I usually do. Woke up the next morning not feeling great, but feeling a lot better than I did before. Why? Because I gave myself the permission to be human, and I took time for recovery. No way around these. If we want to become anti-fragile, if we want to become stronger rather than weaker, if we want to effectively deal with our responsibilities, and we have many of them these days and any days. Let me move on and talk about another topic, and that is relationships. Let me share with you a study. This was a study that was conducted at Harvard. It started in the 1930s, so almost 90 years ago. And what the study did was follow a group of Harvard students as well as members of the community. It followed them for 75 years. So many researchers over the years followed them 75 years, for most of them for the rest of their lives. And they collected millions and millions of data points, a lot of information about them, whether it was through questionnaires, asking them, asking their families, asking their colleagues, whether it's through later on in the 80s and 90s, measuring their brains through fMRI, blood samples, you name it, they measured it. So after 75 years of this study, of measuring these people for their lifespan, they asked a very important question. And that question was, what is the number one predictor of happiness? What is the number one predictor of happiness? You know what the answer? Now, there are a few predictors, but the number one predictor, the most important one, was relationships. The interesting thing about this study, when they looked at them, it didn't matter what kind of relationships, meaning for some of them, it was their romantic relationship, their partner. They'd been together for 50 years or 20 years, but that was the source of their happiness. For others, it was their extended family. Could be, parents earlier on in life, their maybe children and partner, cousins, it doesn't matter. For others, it was colleagues at work who were the source of their happiness. For others, it was friends, whether it's friends from high school or friends from work, it doesn't matter. The key was, whatever relationship they had, it was intimate, it was meaningful, it wasn't perfect, but it was important for them, and they invested in it. Number one predictor of happiness, relationships. Now, there is other research that's very relevant to you. Who are the happiest countries in the world? The happiest countries in the world are countries like Denmark, countries like Norway, countries like Australia, countries like Israel, countries like Colombia and Costa Rica. Why? Why is Latin America the happiest region in the world? One reason, and one reason alone: relationships. Quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. Those researchers in the Harvard study asked a second question. After 75 years, they asked, what is the number one predictor of health? Physical health. And, there are many predictors. Nutrition is very important for health. Of course, physical exercise, I talked about, very important for physical health and mental health. But what's the number one predictor? Number one predictor, you guessed it, relationships. Once again, it doesn't matter what kind of relationships, but intimate, close, meaningful relationships. So this is great. And it's also great for, your country, great for your communities. There's a lot that the US, which is where I am now, can learn from your beautiful country that I've visited many, many times with my family. Many things that you can teach. The problem, though, today is that what's happening to relationships? If we were talking 6 months ago, I would have said to you, the key is to focus on real relationships rather than virtual relationships. Focus on real relationships rather than virtual relationships. That's what I would have said to you 6 months ago. But today, most of us can't have the same kind of real relationships that we had a few months ago. So what distinction do we make if it's not between real and virtual? The distinction we need to make is between deep and superficial. You see, you can still have deep relationships even if it's on WebEx or Zoom, even if it is on the phone, even if it is by writing letters. We can still have deep relationships even if we cannot meet face to face, be in the same room, play together in the same playground. And it's important to cultivate those deep relationships. So, I'm from Israel originally. Tonight we're celebrating our New Year's. I don't remember when the last time was when we didn't celebrate it as a family. Tonight we're not going to. And we're not going to because of the situation. That doesn't mean that I can't spend hours with my parents, and my children can spend hours with their grandchildren on Zoom or on phone. And it's the same in organizations. We're not in the same office, perhaps. However, that doesn't mean that we cannot have real conversations, even if they are online. And your role as a leader is to create conditions that will encourage healthy relationships, even if it is through the media. Now, the important thing to keep in mind when you do that, and this is also the foundation of anti-fragility, relationships are critical for growing from hardship. The key is to remember the number one element for leaders during difficult times. So there was research on it. The research started back in the 1970s. And the question was, what is the most important condition for leaders to put in place during difficult times? You know what the answer was? Listening. The ability to listen, not to be charismatic, not to give amazing speeches. It's to listen before everything else. And by the way, this is not just for organizations. When you go through difficult times in relationships, much more important than talking or giving solutions. And remember, this is especially important for men to remember, because men tend to give more solutions, want to give more solutions. The key is to listen. Listen to your wife, listen to your partner, listen to your colleagues, listen to your employees, listen to your children. That is what kids need today more than ever. Not solutions. They need someone who listens to them. This is also what strengthens relationships. And I would just like to end by sharing one more idea, which is also connected to creating healthy, strong relationships that are the number one predictors of health, happiness and health. The last thing I want to share is the importance of giving. There's a lot of research out there showing just how important giving is. In fact, if we, for example, have money that we can spend, in other words, not money that we need for food, money that we can spend, discretionary income. If we spend it on ourselves, we'll become happier because we bought ourselves shoes or a gadget. But we'll become even happier if we spend it on someone else. Not only will become happier, we'll become happier for longer time when we give. Giving, sharing contributes to happiness. And it's not just giving money. It's also giving of our time. Listening is a form of giving. Anne Frank wrote back in the 1940s, you can always give something, even if it is only kindness. You can always give something, even if it is only kindness. When we give, we receive right back. You know, so my mother tongue, my first language is not English. English is my second language. My first language, my mother tongue, is Hebrew, the language of the Bible. And my favorite word in the Bible is the word to give. The word to give in Hebrew is Natan, N-A-T-A-N, or here it is also in Hebrew letters. Now, the word Natan, if you look at it, it's unusual. What's unique about it? What's unique about it is that it's a palindrome. It's symmetrical, right to left and left to right. It's no coincidence. There is a lot of wisdom in the language of the Bible. Already then, they knew that to give is to receive right back. When I natan, right back. Now, what about giving in organizations? How does that play out? Well, Adam Grant, who was my student at Harvard, he's now a professor at Wharton, did research on giving in organizations. So we know that giving contributes to happiness. We know that giving contributes to organizational success. But what about to the individual? Well, here is the research that Adam Grant talks about. He divided people into three. He found that people naturally divided into three groups: the givers, the takers, and the matchers. Givers are the nice guys. They're the ones who listen, who give advice. They are the ones who help, who teach. They contribute to others. We like givers. They're lovely. They're nice. They're generous with their time, with material goods, whatever it is. And then there are the takers. Takers take from the givers mostly. It's all about me, me, me. These are the takers. Then there are the matchers. Matchers are all about fairness. You gave me 5, I'll give you 5 back. Oh, you just gave me 3. That's all you're getting from me. Quid pro quo. Equal gain, equal give. Now, we all have some of the giver in us. We all have some of the taker in us. We all have some of the matcher in us. The question is, which is more dominant? Now, we know that givers are happier in general. But what about when it comes to performance? Who are the most successful? Are the takers or the matchers maybe, or the givers? So Adam Grant talks about the research, looking at organizations, looking at the top performers, the middle performers, and the bottom tier of an organization. So while there are givers, takers, and matchers on all 3 levels throughout the organization, which group is represented more at the top? Disproportionately represented at the top are the givers. Nice. I'm glad to see this. What about the middle? Disproportionately represented in the middle. There are also givers and matchers and takers at the top, middle, and bottom, but disproportionately represented in the middle are the takers and the matchers. What's going on here? What about the bottom? Disproportionately represented at the bottom, the least successful are the givers. This is interesting research. And the interesting question is, what is the difference between givers at the top and givers at the bottom? Here's the difference. The difference between givers at the top and givers at the bottom is that givers at the top also give themselves. whereas givers at the bottom negate themselves, forget themselves, and they give everything. Maybe nice, but not sustainable. The givers at the top would say, if someone asks for their time, I'll happily give you my time. You know, right now I need to focus on something else. I'll be back with you. Or here is the solution. You can find it elsewhere. They give to others. They don't forget themselves. In other words, they know how to put boundaries on giving. This is important also for parents. Yes, parents give. That's nice. However, parents also need to take care of themselves, of their relationship with their partner, if they're in one, or of their well-being, so that they can give, sustainably give to their children, to their families, to the world. Think about yourselves as well as think about others. You know, back in the days when we used to fly a lot, those were the days, right? We were reminded of this every time we went on a plane, because every time we went on a plane, we were told, put your oxygen mask on first before you help another person next to you. Why? Because we can't take care of others if we don't also take care of ourselves. And this applies to life as a whole. It certainly applies to these times when there are so many hardships and challenges and difficulties. Yes, give, be generous, natan, you'll be given right back. It's wonderful. And also give to yourself. In the words of the Dalai Lama, caring for others only on your sacrifice, caring for others based only on your sacrifice doesn't last. Caring must also feed you. And I'll end with that note. Yes, take care of your employees, of your colleagues. Take care of your community, of your beautiful country. Take care of your lovely family. And don't forget to take care of yourself. Give yourself the permission to be human as you give others that permission. Find times for recovery and encourage others to recover as well, whether it's through breathing, through exercise, through time together when technology is off. And invest in your relationships. Invest in the people you love. They're the number one generator of your happiness. They're the number one generator of your health. And invest in yourself so that you and others can become anti-fragile, so that you and others can learn and grow and become even stronger and happier as a result of everything that we are going through. So take care. Take good care of yourself and others. And now I would love to hear your questions.
Profesor Shahar, mil gracias. Claro que va a haber preguntas. Vamos a entrar a moderar, a opinar sobre lo que usted nos ha dicho. Gracias por sus palabras. Muy enriquecedor para estos momentos y para el futuro, sin duda alguna. Quiero darle la bienvenida al doctor Rodríguez. Bienvenido, doctor, al Congreso Colombiano de la Construcción y muchas gracias por haber aceptado esta invitación de Camacol. Adelante con su comentario y sus preguntas para el conferencista.
Muy bien, muy buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias a Camacol por esta invitación a compartir algunas ideas con ustedes y sobre todo a tener la oportunidad de escuchar al gran profesor Tal Ben Shahar, un académico que admiro mucho. Un saludo especial a la doctora Sandra Porero, presidenta de Camacol. Cito por su liderazgo. Confío en que el sector de la construcción sea el motor de la reactivación de la economía colombiana. Necesitamos urgentemente la creación masiva de empleo y estamos ustedes, los empresarios del sector de la construcción, solucionar la grave crisis social y económica de millones de colombianos que dependen de la economía para salir adelante en medio de la pandemia. Muy bien, quiero hacer dos o tres comentarios breves sobre la intervención del profesor Ben Shahar y luego todas sus preguntas porque afortunadamente no tenemos mucho tiempo. Lo primero es que creo que es un acierto de Camacol, de la doctora Sandra, haber invitado al profesor Ben Shahar, porque la felicidad de muchas personas es un cuento de hadas, es un tema esotérico, un tema light, superficial, de libros de autoayuda llenos de recetas fantasiosas, y mucha gente seria realmente no le presta atención al tema. Pero lo que ha logrado el profesor Shahar es precisamente convertir el asunto de la felicidad en una ciencia, a través de investigación, a través del análisis de datos, de evidencia empírica, de formulación de hipótesis y de comprobación de sus teorías, ha logrado que el tema de la felicidad se vuelva un tema clave de liderazgo, que es el tema que yo estudio. Soy profesor de liderazgo de las universidades externadas de los Andes. Y he visto que a lo largo de los años, en 35 años, 36 de estudio académico, estos temas de liderazgo y de acompañar en la práctica a muchos líderes públicos y privados en nuestro país, el tema de la felicidad es crucial, absolutamente crucial. Los líderes que tienen la capacidad de viajar por esa montaña rusa emocional de la que habla el Tal Ben Shahar en sus libros, son capaces de lidiar con las dos caras de la moneda, que son capaces de superar la adversidad, son resilientes, son líderes mucho más exitosos. Esos líderes que tienen la capacidad de ser humanos, como dice el profesor Shahar, que se permiten ser humanos, son más resilientes, son más capaces de aprovechar el lado positivo de las emociones, la energía, el entusiasmo, la pasión, el amor por la causa, es lo que alimenta el liderazgo. Pero ellas y ellos saben que no todo el tiempo las cosas van a salir bien y que no hay que ser perfecto y que hay que aprender a convivir con nuestras fallas, nuestras frustraciones, con la tristeza, con el miedo, con la angustia, con la ansiedad. Entonces, simplemente quiero decir, doy testimonio pleno de que las investigaciones de profesor Ben Shahar demuestran que y Colombia no es la excepción. Que la felicidad es un asunto de la más alta prioridad en la agenda de los líderes. Muchas veces se piensa que es un tema blando, ¿no? Y que es algo suave, una habilidad secundaria. Hay que pensar en los temas duros, tradicionales. Pero la verdad es que si no nos encargamos de atender la felicidad propia y la de los demás, no podríamos liderar con éxito, no podremos dejar un buen legado, no podremos de verdad servir a la comunidad. El segundo punto es que en investigaciones recientes que he hecho en Colombia, cuando le pregunto a las personas cuáles son sus cualidades más importantes de un líder en este momento, las respuestas son similares a las que acaba de mencionar. Quieren líderes conectados en lo humano, quieren líderes empáticos, quieren líderes que escuchen sus problemas, sus angustias, sus dudas, quieren líderes sensibles. Y no solamente líderes que sean empáticos, sino que sean compasivos. Tanto la expresión de un colega del profesor Ben Shahar, psicólogo Paul Bloom, que dice que la empatía es necesaria, es conveniente, pero que hay que ir un paso más allá. Hay que practicar la compasión consciente, activa. ¿Qué quiere decir? No solamente ser empático, sentir lo que sienten los demás, ser solidario con ese sufrimiento, con esas
Esto
preocupaciones.
es tan importante lo que está hablando el doctor Rodríguez, que vamos a tratar de súper mejorar la conexión que tenemos con él para poder seguir en esta charla donde estamos con Tal Ben Shahar, doctor en comportamiento organizacional, graduado en filosofía, en psicología. Él es de la Universidad de Harvard y reconocido como el profesor de la felicidad por el éxito que obtuvo como profesor en esa universidad. Yo estaba, mientras ustedes lo estaban escuchando, apuntando algunas frases con las que sin duda me quedo con esas frases: cultiven sus relaciones, cuiden a los que aman. Y a veces eso parece tan obvio, pero en momentos como este, sin duda alguna, donde a veces estamos mucho tiempo en nuestra
Sí, ya.
casa, olvidamos a los que están cerca y cultivar nuestras relaciones. Decía el profesor Shahar que incluso ese es el número uno, la premisa de la felicidad, que son las relaciones, que pueden ser las románticas, las de los padres, las de los hijos, sin duda alguna, el colegaje en la oficina. Entonces, hay frases que sin duda hay momentos que podemos recuperar, el tema de la recuperación. Eso para mí incluso es nuevo, estamos en momentos de estrés, tenemos que recuperarnos. Es claro, uno pensaba en el gimnasio, ahí sí nos recuperamos cuando hacemos, nos vamos a trotar o hacemos un fuerte ejercicio en el gimnasio, entonces ahí sí paramos, nos recuperamos. Bueno, eso no lo hacemos en el día a día, así que por lo menos yo he aprendido muchísimo hoy de Tal Ben Shahar, doctor en comportamiento organizacional, profesor de la felicidad y que nos estaba dando una gran charla. El doctor Rodríguez pues estaba haciendo un approach a poder preguntarle a él sobre el tema también de la empatía, que hoy hablamos tanto de la empatía, pero no estamos muy seguros si lo ponemos en funcionamiento. Cuando me confirmen que tenemos al doctor Rodríguez, vamos con él. Doctor Rodríguez, creo que lo tenemos mejor. Adelante.
Sí. Ofrezco disculpas por los problemas de comunicación, pero quiero retomar la idea de que no solamente hay que ser empático, sentir lo que sienten los demás, sino hacer algo al respecto. Y aquí conecto con la idea del profesor Ben Shahar de dar, de aportar, de ser generoso, compartir. Esa generosidad, esa sensibilidad es la que logra la conexión humana, que es más importante ahora que nunca. Muy bien, y por último, yo lo que quisiera mencionar es que la arrogancia, esa falta de sensibilidad, esa incapacidad de conectarse en lo humano, esa incapacidad de reconocer las debilidades, los vacíos, los errores que tienen algunos líderes, siempre ha sido una de las grandes barreras del liderazgo eficaz. Pero hoy más que nunca la gente no soporta a los líderes arrogantes. En mis investigaciones, cuando les pregunto por el principal defecto de un líder, sobre todo en tiempos de crisis, es esa arrogancia, esa prepotencia, ese aislamiento de la gente y esa incapacidad de escuchar, como dice el profesor Ben Shahar, de escuchar con atención, con respeto, con profundidad y de comunicar, pero comunicar no es dar órdenes, no es dar instrucciones, es realmente establecer un diálogo que permita construir una solución compartida. Muy bien, y por aquí mis comentarios porque creo que es más importante hacer unos minutos finales en un par de preguntas. Profesor Ben Shahar, usted nos ha recomendado en esta charla y en sus libros muchos consejos prácticos para aprovechar al máximo nuestro potencial humano y construir esa felicidad nuestra. Y son muchas cosas sentido común, Usted mismo ha dicho que son las cosas que hemos escuchado a nuestra abuela toda la vida. Ejercicio, comer bien, tener buenas relaciones, servir a la comunidad, en fin, son todas cosas bastante elementales, bastante sencillas. Pero la realidad es que en la práctica nos cuesta mucho trabajo desarrollar los hábitos y tener la disciplina para aplicar esas recomendaciones suyas. La pregunta concreta es, ¿cómo desarrollar esos hábitos? ¿Qué tipo de recomendaciones prácticas para inculcar esos hábitos en nuestra vida cotidiana, en nuestra rutina?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Professor, for your comments. They are insightful, and they also helped me think deeper about these ideas. I especially appreciate your comment on the importance of humbleness as opposed to arrogance. The importance for leaders, the importance for all of us of that characteristic. So thank you. And you're absolutely spot on in terms of the challenge within the field of happiness. The challenge is not understanding these ideas. The challenge is applying these ideas. And the best advice that research tells us actually may not come from our grandmother, but it comes from religion. Because religion really understood change. Philosophy didn't. So Socrates, thousands of years ago, said, to know the good is to do the good. He was actually wrong. Just knowing is not enough. Religion understood that it's not through knowing that we bring about change, but rather through rituals. That if we create rituals, daily, weekly, monthly rituals, that's how we bring about change. This is why when I talked about taking a deep breath, just for 30 seconds, the key for that to bring about change is if you do it day in and day out regularly. Same with physical exercise. 3 times a week. Just like we brush our teeth every night. We need to introduce rituals into our lives. Initially, introducing rituals is difficult. But after a while, it becomes a habit. And then we have neural pathways in our brains that lead us to do it again and again and again. But until these neural pathways are created, it's a challenge to introduce these new rituals, which is why we should introduce 1 or 2 new rituals at a time, not 10 or 20 new things, 1 or 2. For example, you can start with regular physical exercise and spending twice a week for 1 hour listening to your employees. And once you feel this is in place, just like brushing your teeth is, it's a habit, then you can move on and introduce the next habit.
Profesor Ben Shahar, una pregunta concreta. Usted ha dicho en sus libros que el 50% de la felicidad depende de la genética personal. El 10% depende del contexto, del entorno en que estamos. Y el 40% restante, depende de las decisiones que tomemos. O sea, 60%, la mayoría de la felicidad no está en nuestras manos. El 40% sí. Acá la pregunta es, ¿cómo mejorar nuestro proceso de toma de decisiones? ¿Qué es lo que hay que hacer especial, adicional, para que esas decisiones le permitan a uno ampliar un poco el control del destino de su felicidad, no depender de la genética ni del contexto?
That's a very important question. There are two messages in this research. The first is that yes, genes matter and they matter a lot. So what we got from evolution or from God matters a lot. At the same time, the second message of this research is that these numbers capture averages. For example, on average, 10% of our happiness is determined by external circumstances. But what about a person who's born into extreme poverty? Or what about a person who's born in a place where there is war? Or what about a girl who's born in a place where women are oppressed? Then external circumstances matter much more than 10%. The same with our decisions and our choices. They account for 40% of our happiness on average. We can increase that amount by being mindful of the decisions and choices that we have. So just like there are rhetorical questions that we know the answer to, there are also rhetorical choices. Rhetorical choices, for example, do you want to be grateful for your life? Or do you want to take your life for granted? Do you want to be a kind person? Or do you want to be a harsh person? These are rhetorical choices. Of course, I want to be grateful, and of course, I want to be kind. And yet, we're not always grateful, and we're not always kind. And we need to bring these choices to our awareness so that the rhetorical choices become actions. How do we do that? Once again, religion is very smart about this. Religion has reminders all over, whether it's reminders through the daily prayer, whether it's reminders through art or music, or reminders through special days. So we need to introduce reminders in our lives so that we can repeat a particular action so that it becomes a ritual. And these are what I call, in English, the 3 R's of change. Reminders, repetition, and rituals. I see that it works in Spanish as well.
Sí, así es. Profesor Ben Shahar, una curiosidad como académico y también como periodista que soy. ¿Qué ha aprendido usted personalmente en estos 6 meses de pandemia? ¿Qué ha cambiado en usted? ¿Qué ha sentido especial? ¿Qué lo ha hecho pensar 2 veces sobre lo que usted creía antes de la pandemia? ¿Y qué piensa ahora sobre su vida, sobre la felicidad?
So I'd like to share two things. First is that I've gone back to basics and am doing more of the basics than before. For example, I always exercise 3 times a week. Now I'm actually exercising 5 times a week. Why? Because exercise really helps deal with anxiety. And levels of anxiety for me, and I think for many people, is higher now. Permission to be human. I write in my journal regularly during normal times. I write in my journal twice as much, giving myself the permission to be human. Spending time with family, even more so now than before. So this is the first thing that I wanted to share. Going back to basics and doing more of the basics. The second point has to do with what you brought up, Professor, and that is humbleness. You know, in the past, I always used to say, having high expectations is key. Today, I understand that having high expectations is still very important for success, not necessarily for happiness. For example, if my expectation is to be happy all the time, because after all, I'm an expert on happiness, right? Then I'm bound to be disappointed. Because like everyone else, I'll experience my ups and downs. Or let's say I go into a relationship and my expectation is that we will live happily ever after. That what we're experiencing now during the honeymoon will last for the rest of our lives together. That's wrong expectation. And that's a prescription for unhappiness. Every relationship, even the best of relationships, has ups and downs. So being more humble, lowering our expectations, that's healthy. And I think that this pandemic is teaching all of us a lesson in being more humble.
Sí, muy bien. No sé si tenemos tiempo para una pregunta, pero me gustaría mucho si brevemente nos explicara el concepto detrás de este mensaje suyo, de uno de sus libros. Y es que para ser feliz es indispensable aprender a fracasar, aprender a lidiar con las equivocaciones, con los errores. Y eso suena sabio, inteligente, pero de nuevo, en la práctica es muy difícil reconocer un error y superar una equivocación grave, aprender una lección de eso. ¿Qué debe hacer uno y no debe hacer cuando enfrenta un fracaso importante?
You know, one of the sentences that I repeat over and over again in my books, my lectures, when I talk to my clients or my children or myself, is learn to fail or fail to learn. Learn to fail or fail to learn. Because there is no other way to learn. We learn how to walk by falling down. We learn how to kick a football by missing over and over again. We learn how to eat by making a mess. And it's the same with everything that we learn. I spoke about relationships. We learn how to be better in relationships by making mistakes. We learn how to be better parents by making mistakes. We learn how to be better leaders by making mistakes. And by learning from the mistakes of others. The most successful organizations are organizations that enjoy what Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School calls psychological safety. Psychological safety is the feeling that I have as an employee in the organization that it's okay to fail, that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's okay for me to say, I don't know. Organizations where there is psychological safety enjoy higher levels of creativity and innovation, a much better ability to overcome challenging times. They are ultimately more successful. The job satisfaction is higher. They are more likely to last. And employees are more likely to stay in these organizations. Now, that doesn't mean that as a manager, as a leader, you should say to everyone, fail as much as you want all the time. There are certain boundaries that you as a manager need to put in place, where failure is an option and where you need to micromanage and make sure that something is done 100%. At the same time, there is also a very large space where psychological safety is essential. And it's in this space that your employees, your teams, your organization grows, develops, and fulfills its potential. Psychological safety is the #1 predictor of organizational success.
Muchas gracias, profesor Shahar, por estas excelentes contribuciones a la felicidad del mundo. Su trabajo es muy importante y le agradezco mucho su presencia a título personal en nombre de Camacoli, en nombre de los que tuvimos el privilegio de escuchar hoy sus ideas. Muchas gracias por sus aportes a la felicidad y quedamos pendientes de sus nuevas investigaciones, de sus nuevos libros, para seguir aprendiendo a ser felices, no solo para el bienestar nuestro, sino para el bienestar de nuestros seres queridos, para el bienestar de la comunidad, del mundo entero. Muchas gracias.